Okay, so something huge just happened in Central Europe. A political earthquake, really. And the tremors are being felt way beyond its borders. We're diving into an election that just ended the rule of one of Europe's most powerful and controversial leaders.
Yep, you heard that right. After a solid 16 years in power, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has officially conceded defeat. This is an absolutely massive deal for a leader who, for the longest time, seemed totally unbeatable.
And get this, the energy behind this shift was just incredible. The election saw a record-breaking voter turnout of nearly 78%. This wasn't just people going through the motions. It was clear that everyone felt the stakes were incredibly high. So that brings us to the big questions we're going to tackle today. How in the world did this happen? Who is this newcomer that managed to pull off such a stunning upset? And why were governments from Washington to Brussels to Moscow paying such close attention? Let's get into it. All right, first things first, let's just look at the raw numbers, because this wasn't a narrow win by any stretch. The scale of this victory is pretty staggering, and it gives the new leadership a really powerful mandate to make changes. I mean, the numbers really do speak for themselves. The challenger, Peter Magyar, and his party are projected to win 137 seats in the 199-seat parliament. To put that into perspective, that's a supermajority. We're talking more than two-thirds control. This wasn't just a win, it was a political landslide. And you don't have to take my word for it. Viktor Orban himself came right out and said it. The results, he admitted, were painful for his side, but they were also crystal clear. He conceded, and just like that, a new era in Hungarian politics began. But to really get why this is such a shocker, you've got to understand the guy who was just defeated. So let's take a minute to talk about Viktor Orban and the powerful political identity he built over 16 years. So for 16 years, Orban was the face of Hungarian politics. He was famous for clashing with the European Union over things like the rule of law and democratic values. At the same time, he built up some very close relationships with leaders like Russia's Vladimir Putin, and even got an endorsement from former U.S. President Donald Trump. His latest campaign was all about national sovereignty and framing neighboring Ukraine as a threat. Now, a core piece of his political philosophy was this idea he proudly called illiberal democracy. So what does that actually mean? Well, think of it this way. You still have elections, people still go and vote, but behind the scenes, civil liberties and things like press freedom get chipped away, and power gets more and more concentrated with the people in charge. But it's super important to understand why he was so popular for so long. For his supporters, like this woman, Maria Toth, Orban was a hero. He was seen as a defender of Hungary, protecting the nation's sovereignty from what they saw as interference from big powers like Brussels. That message of him as a protector of traditional values really resonated with a huge chunk of the population for a very long time. Okay, so if Orban's message was that strong, what changed? Well, it all comes down to the challenger. And man, you couldn't find a more perfect contrast. On one side, you have Orban, the veteran nationalist. On the other, Peter Magyar, a total political newcomer who, and this is the kicker, used to be an insider in Orban's own system. So let's talk about this challenger. Who is Peter Magyar, the man who managed to do what nobody else could for over a decade, break Viktor Orban's grip on power? His rise was, well, incredibly fast. Seriously, just 2 years ago, most people had never even heard of him. He bursts onto the scene as a former government insider, which gave him instant credibility. He starts talking about fighting the very corruption he claimed he saw firsthand, all the shady contracts and favoritism that so many people were tired of. His message of clean government and better services just caught fire. And this quote from a supporter, Orsolia Rozgauni, really says it all. She talks about being full of hope. For her and millions of others, Magyar wasn't just another politician. He represented a real, genuine possibility for change after years and years of the same thing. You could just feel that optimism. Okay, let's zoom out for a second. Because this wasn't just some local election that only Hungarians cared about. A lot of people around the world were watching this one very, very closely. I mean, you had major American political figures like former President Trump and Senator J.D. Vance actively supporting Orban. That turned this whole election into a kind of symbolic battle. For both the EU and the United States, the outcome was seen as a major signpost for the future of populist nationalist politics in Europe. Under Orban, Hungary really carved out a unique and, let's be honest, often disruptive role for itself. He loved calling himself a thorn in the side of the EU, always blocking joint decisions and challenging its authority. At the same time, he kept things cozy with Russia and China and used some pretty harsh rhetoric towards Ukraine, which often put him at odds with Western allies. So, after such a dramatic shift, the billion-dollar question is, what happens now? Where does Hungary go from here? The key takeaway here is pretty clear. A brand new leader is about to take charge in Hungary. Peter Magyar's victory signals a potential major pivot, a move away from Orban's so-called illiberal model and towards a renewed focus on fighting corruption and repairing relationships with European and Western partners. And that leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to chew on. Is what just happened in Hungary a kind of blueprint for how to challenge populist leaders in other countries? Or was this just a unique, perfect storm that can't be replicated? The answer to that is going to shape not just the future of Hungary, but maybe the entire political landscape of Europe for years to come.